Hi everyone, Adrian Player here. I'm an investment focused mortgage broker and we focus on dealing with complex investors in the resi side but also the commercial side. All right, in this video we're going to be talking about specialized security. I'm going to be giving you 4 examples of what specialized security is. The 4th one is a little bit of a bonus. And then we're going to be talking to you about how lenders see it and what are some of the examples that we've had from clients and how the lenders have treated it. Because a lot of people think that you can just go out and get any property and get a 30 to a 35% deposit and costs. So a 65 or a 70% LVR. And unfortunately, that's not the case. All right. Now, in the resi space, there's 50 plus lenders, but in the commercial space, there's only about 9 to 10 lenders out there in the commercial space. And half of those lenders are on really high interest rates in second and third tier banks. So really, you only have about half of those lenders, maybe 5 to 7 lenders at any one time that are going to give you a really good interest rate on a deal. And if you're not sticking with, the large categories of properties, big box retail, industrial warehouses, retail, medical, things like that, then you're in a position where lenders might treat you differently based on the deal. Now, a lot of the time with commercial, people don't realise, but everything is done in reverse to residential. In residential, you submit through to a bank for a pre-approval. In commercial, you go off whatever the broker notes are, and a lot of the time my clients use a buyer's agent, so I write out all the notes. I've dealt with Policey Property, where I've dealt with hundreds of their clients in relation to buying commercial properties. And, I would list out, this is what the client's profile looks like, this is what they should be targeting, and this is why. And then I hand it off to the buyer's agent. And then the buyer's agent goes out and finds that property that inside of those parameters. And then it matches, what I've said. And then they sign a finance clause for up to 30 days. And then I go ahead and I write a profile on the client and the deal, and then I send it off to the lenders for them to go and have a look at. So a lot of the time, I'm actually pre-vetting a lot of the properties and telling clients what banks like before they sign. So then hopefully they can have a little bit better of a more positive experience when dealing with lenders in relation, because I know, how much cash the client's got and what their expectations are for the loan. So any way that I can help in that process, I will. So we're going to be talking about specialized security. So it's a fancy way of saying that the bank sees this as a higher risk, right? And to offset that risk, a lot of the time they're going to limit your LVR down to 50 or 55%. So these are the examples that I've got in front of you. So we're going to use a couple of these examples. Now I'm on another screen at the moment rolling through this, right? So we're going to be talking about strip retail, and mainly we're going to talk about this one here. So you could have a train station down here, a supermarket down here, and you could be buying a shop in the center. Well, a lot of lenders will actually treat that as strip retail. It's just a fancy word of saying that there's 20 in a block, you're buying smack bang in the middle. There's a lot of shops around it. A lot of the time the bank, you're not owning 20 of the shops in the 20 retail strip. You're not understanding what the true mix is of all the tenants in that strip. And because of that, there's higher risk associated with the deal. And also, if you're linked directly to the middle of a CBD, everyone's been seeing, especially Sydney and Melbourne, if you walk around in the CBD, there's a lot of these shop fronts that are either not rented at all, or as soon as the lease comes out, they go vacant, and they go vacant for very long periods of time. So you're seeing a lot of abandonment in these kind of situations, and then you're seeing a lot of homeless in these areas and high crime rates, and then retailers and people that would take up those shops are now not doing so. So lenders are offsetting their risk at the moment. And they're treating a lot more of these as strip retail and reducing the LVR. So a lot of people think that they can get a 30 or a 35% deposit in, when a lot of these you can't. Now, you always send these around to quite a few lenders, and every time they might look at it differently, or let's say they've written a whole lot of industrial and they're wanting to offset that on their loan books. Every now and then lenders do change. So it's never an absolute no, but it's a lot of the time this is how it's going to be treated, and you better have a larger deposit if you're going into these kind of assets. But if you're a beginner, these are normally assets that you would avoid, right? So second one, let's talk about this, childcare centres. Everyone thinks that childcare centres are amazing. One, because the leases are so long. Some of these have 20 to 40 year leases. I've seen leases as long as 45 years. Now, I've actually spoken to the head of credit with the delegation that signs off on a lot of these in one of the major banks. And one of the things that he told me was, one, the birth rates have dropped from 1.65 down to 1.45. Also, where the children are has changed heavily. And a lot of the people, the childcare centres that are doing extremely well are the ones that are in the city where all the jobs are. So parents go into the city for their work, drop the child off. Those particular centres are doing very well. And also the ones on the outskirts of the main cities, because that's where a lot of the couples are, so right on the city fringe. All right. Now, what a lot of people don't realise is banks have multiple rules for childcare centres. Like I had a client with a 5 mil childcare centre at the top of Logan, right? And I shopped it around to 5 or 6 of the main lenders. And we got a number of non-standard questions like, who is operating it? And if it wasn't a top 3 franchise, the biggest 3 in the country, they didn't want it. Second question was, how many spots are in the childcare centre? And a lot of the banks had either a rule of 120 spots or 70 spots. They didn't want the smaller childcare centres. And then the last thing that one of the big head of credits told me that signs off on a lot of these deals, a lot of the time, people don't realise that there are actually big super funds, instos and REITs that play in this space. And the properties that come onto the market, all these big ones have already looked over it. So it's like a big cabal of childcare operators. And they actually get to look over every deal on market before it actually comes on the market. So a lot of the time, banks see this as secondary stock or stock that the big guys did not want when they review childcare centres, which again increases the risk of the banks. All right, so don't take that as a rule of thumb. That's just one person that signs off on a lot of these deals, but they've actually spoken directly with large operators in the space, and they've told them outright that any single property that goes onto the market, they've already checked and avoided because all the good ones get taken off before they get listed. So again, that's food for thought, but a lot of people that get into this space, you tend to need about 6 to 9 mil to get into one of the bigger ones in one of the better areas with very high occupancy. You do not want to be buying any one of these with low occupancy or the business struggling unless you have a lot of experience or you're linked to someone that has a lot of experience in the space to get the occupancy up and offsetting your risk. Because if the business doesn't do well, your investment doesn't do well. All right, so that's the next one. So let's talk about the third one. So a lot of people talk about this very differently. It could be a rooming house. It could be a converted large house where they've created it into like a 5-bedder rooming house. It could have kitchenettes and a bathroom in each room. It could not. That's more of what's called a micro apartment. And a lot of these have a shared kitchen and a shared laundry, right? And then every door to the bedrooms are locked and then rented out individually. Now, true rooming houses have have a lot of extra risk and costs. Why? Because they've got so many extra things in all the bedrooms. So extra kitchenettes, extra plumbing for all the bathrooms, extra locks, extra air cons, extra everything. So the costs of renting out a room and the vacancy rate and the turnover rate, and also a lot of the leases for a lot of these has to be really restrictive. A lot of the rooming houses say you can't be a couple in them, and you've got a lot of restrictions on who you can bring over and how long they can stay. Some of them have, electric and water inclusive bills, and a lot of them don't. And a lot of the time you've got to have them close to like a large hospital or maybe a really big university where there's a lot of overseas students that want cheap rentals. That's normally the places that go. But there's a lot of spruikers in the space that quote these huge rental yields that you make. And I've been in the space for 17 years and I'm yet to see someone that has made huge amounts of money on rooming house. One, because most lenders don't like them as security. So the lenders that do, the rates are through the roof, so you have a lot less lender selection. Two, the vacancy goes through the roof because you're churning your tenants a lot longer. Three, the costs of holding and maintaining are a lot higher based on an individual property versus a property that's got so many amenities and, plumbing and electric for every single bedroom, right? So these are some of the things that people deal with, and then there's a hell of a lot of people in the space that, try and pass these assets off as residential to get residential rates, and then they end up having problems with the lenders. So, lenders treat this as a specialised security, max LVR 50 to 55%, but again, you just shop it around to enough lenders. Some do like the construction, some don't. So you might have to pay for the land with a residential lender, and then you might have to take the build to a private lender to do the build, because a lot of these commercial banks do not like doing the builds in this space. And then, you've got to exit it back via a third tier lender on a really high rate, because a lot of these other lenders don't like the refinance back. And the LVRs, you can't get anywhere close to, where you want on residential. So a lot of the time it shocks a lot of people. They see these great numbers quoted in front of them, but then it all turns into a bit of a mirage. So that's the rooming house. And then the last one that we're going to be talking about is petrol stations. I love petrol stations, especially when you're getting 10 and 15 year leases. You're getting a huge land component. I love the ones that are like the last before the end of the highway, or the ones where you're in large regional and it's the biggest one there. All right, I love those. But if you're in a main city and on 5K stretch of road, there's 7 petrol stations, you better be very careful with these kind of assets. Also, there's a lot of different rules with these assets. Now, some lenders I've actually found, because I've had a couple of investors buy these, they treat you differently based on who the tenant is and how big the tenant is. So if it's one of the big 3, they actually allow you to get a higher LVR. They'll also ask you about an environmental report, which can cost 10, 20, 30, 40 grand, depending on if you've got to get the report or if it's already there. They'll also ask how old are the tanks, what are the compliance and the upkeep on the tanks, and what are the lining on the tanks, because the lining has changed in the last 10, 15, 20 years, and they will treat you differently. All right. And also, if it's a contaminated site, a lot of the lenders will not like that and will crash the deal halfway through. All right. But I tend to love these kind of investments, especially if you're buying a large one in a regional setting or on the highway where you're the last one on a highway. I tend to really like these ones because a lot of the time they're buy, sit and forget. Now, there is a lot of people talking about the electrification of Australia and talking about EVs. But my view is Australia, it's going to be super hard to do that. One, with our electrical grid, one with how much power station and power that we've got, and and how big Australia is, and the amount of charging stations that they'll need. So I think that they might do that in large, like really large regional or main cities. They might have EV policies in the future, 5, 10 or 15 years, but in the large regions or in the spaces where, they don't have charging stations everywhere, or the amount of power needed to be able to charge all of this stuff, I still think that petrol stations have a really good long run. And a lot of the time, if you buy the right one, it is very buy, sit and forget and compound, which you really want on your first or your second one. So one, you might be able to get the LVR up to 60 to 70%, depending on how big the site is, where it is, and who's the operator, and how old it is, and how old the tanks are. But everyone thinks that they can just get the LVR that they want and be on their merry way. And no, a lot of banks do treat this as specialised security. So hopefully these videos are helping you. If you need help from my team, I deal with complex investors on the residential and the commercial side. Not many brokers know both sides, and how the complex investor side on the resi side impacts the commercial side. We do this every day of the week. So if you need help, reach out. My email's there in the comments below. More than happy to help. See you on the next video. Take care. Bye.